Sometimes the mountains hold on to things we thought were lost forever. Sometimes what we need most finds us when we least expect it. 60-year-old Silas Boone lived alone in Montana's wilderness, with only his dog Whiskey for company. His wife Martha had been gone 20 years now, and he'd made peace with the silence. Then one evening by the river, Whiskey found something impossible, a giant ocean shell, far from any sea. The shell was warm and seemed to hum with life. When Whiskey started acting protective and strange, Silas knew he had to open it. Inside was a soft light and a letter in Martha's handwriting. But Martha was buried in the valley cemetery 2 decades ago. How could her words be sealed inside this mysterious shell? What message had traveled so far to reach him? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the Bitterroot Range like old memories, reluctant to let go of the night. Silas Boone stood on the weathered porch of his cabin, coffee steaming in a chipped ceramic mug that Martha had painted with wildflowers 30 years ago. The cup was one of the few things he couldn't bring himself to pack away after she passed. It felt right in his hands. Familiar weight, familiar warmth. At his feet, Whiskey stretched and yawned, the old blue-tick coonhound's grey muzzle catching the first golden rays of sunlight filtering through the pine canopy. 13 years they'd been together, ever since Martha found the pup abandoned near the trading post in Hamilton. "He's got good eyes," she'd said, scratching behind the dog's ears, while Silas protested they didn't need another mouth to feed. But Martha had a way of seeing things others missed, and Whiskey had proven himself 100 times over. The cabin itself was a testament to persistence, hand-hewn logs that Silas had cut and fitted himself, chinked with mud and moss that he refreshed each spring. 2 rooms downstairs, a sleeping loft above, and a stone fireplace that had warmed 3 decades of mountain winters. Martha had insisted on real glass windows instead of oiled paper, and she'd been right about that too. On mornings like this, the view stretched for miles across the valley, where the Bitterroot River wound like a silver thread through stands of lodgepole pine and Douglas fir. Silas had come to this country in 1955. Fresh out of Korea with a purple heart he kept in a dresser drawer and memories that surfaced like splinters. The mountains offered something the cities couldn't: silence that wasn't empty, solitude that wasn't lonely. He'd trapped beaver and marten, guided hunters in the fall, and sold enough pelts to keep body and soul together. When he met Martha at a church social in Hamilton, she was teaching school and reading poetry by lamplight. She should have chosen a banker or a shopkeeper, someone who could give her electric lights and running water. Instead, she chose him. "You've got kind eyes," she'd told him on their 3rd date, walking along the Bitterroot while cottonwoods dropped their leaves like confetti. "And you listen when people talk, really listen. That's rarer than you might think." They'd married in the spring of 1962, and she'd followed him up the mountain to this cabin he'd built with his own hands. For 18 years, they'd shared this life, reading by firelight, tending a garden that somehow flourished despite the short growing season, and learning that love wasn't just the passionate flush of youth, but the steady warmth of 2 people choosing each other every day. Martha had a gift for finding beauty in small things. She could spend an hour watching hummingbirds at the feeder, or studying the way morning light caught spiderwebs heavy with dew. She pressed wildflowers between the pages of books, collected smooth river stones, and painted watercolors of the view from their bedroom window. The cabin still held traces of her presence, dried lavender hanging from the rafters, a shelf of books with her careful notes in the margins, and that coffee cup with its cheerful wildflowers. The cancer took her slowly, giving them time to say goodbye properly. Silas had driven her down to the hospital in Missoula for treatments, but the doctors' faces told the story their words tried to soften. In the end, she came home to die, and Silas held her hand while she slipped away on a March morning when the first crocuses were pushing through the snow. "Don't you go getting all bitter," she'd whispered near the end, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. "Promise me, Silas, there's still good in this world, still beauty to be found." Don't close your heart to it. He'd buried her in the valley cemetery, under a simple granite stone that read, Martha Elizabeth Boone. Beloved wife, she saw the light in everything, for 20 years now. He'd kept that promise as best he could, though some days it felt like swimming upstream against a river in flood. Whiskey understood grief in the way that animals do, without words or explanation, but with a steady presence that said more than comfort ever could. The dog had been Martha's shadow during her final months, never leaving her side except for the briefest necessities. After she died, Whiskey had howled for 3 nights straight, a sound that seemed to echo through the mountains and come back changed, carrying something ancient and mournful. Now, as Silas finished his coffee and set the cup on the porch rail, Whiskey rose and padded over to stand beside him. The dog's ears were pricked forward, alert to some sound or scent that Silas couldn't detect. In all their years together, Silas had learned to trust the dog's instincts. Whiskey had warned him of bears, alerted him to strangers approaching the cabin, and once led him away from a deadfall, just minutes before the rotted tree crashed down. "What is it, boy?" Silas asked, running his hand along the dog's neck. Whiskey's muscles were tense, coiled like a spring, but his tail wasn't wagging with the excitement he usually showed for rabbits or squirrels. This was something else, a wariness that made the hair on Silas's own neck stand up. The morning was perfectly still, without even a breath of wind to stir the pine boughs. No birdsong, no rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. It was the kind of silence that preceded thunderstorms, though the sky showed nothing but clear blue stretching to the horizon. Silas's daily routine rarely varied. After morning coffee, he'd walk the trap lines he still maintained, check his snares and gather firewood. In the afternoon, he might fish the beaver ponds or tend his small garden. Evenings were for reading, for watching the sun set behind the western peaks, and for remembering. It was a quiet life, perhaps lonely by some standards, but it suited him. He'd had visitors over the years, his nephew from Seattle, who came every few summers, concerned about the old man living alone in the wilderness. Park rangers occasionally checked on him, and sometimes hikers would stumble upon his cabin, surprised to find anyone living so far from civilization. But mostly, it was just him and Whiskey, and the mountains that changed with the seasons but remained fundamentally eternal. The isolation had its challenges. The nearest neighbor was 15 miles down a mountain road that became impassable during heavy snows. His radio picked up a station from Missoula if the weather was right, and he made monthly trips to Hamilton for supplies. But he'd grown accustomed to his own company, to the rhythms of a life measured not by clocks, but by the position of the sun and the behavior of animals. Whiskey suddenly let out a low whine and trotted toward the path that led down to the river. He paused at the edge of the clearing, looking back at Silas with an expression that seemed almost human in its urgency. "All right, then," Silas said, pulling on his worn leather jacket. "Let's see what's got you so worked up." He followed the dog down the familiar trail, noting how Whiskey moved with purpose rather than his usual meandering exploration. The path wound through stands of aspen and pine, dropping gradually toward the water. Silas had walked this route thousands of times over the decades, in all seasons and weather. He knew every root that might catch a boot, every rock that shifted underfoot. But today felt different. The very air seemed charged with possibility, like the moment before lightning strikes. As they descended toward the river, Silas found himself thinking of Martha's words about keeping his heart open to wonder. After 20 years of careful living, of maintaining routines that held grief at bay, perhaps something extraordinary was finally coming to find him. The Bitterroot River ran clear and cold, fed by snowmelt from the peaks above. Silas could hear it before he saw it, the ancient sound of water over stones that had soothed him through countless sleepless nights. As they approached the bank, Whiskey's behavior became even more peculiar. The dog's hackles rose, and he began to circle something near the water's edge, whining low in his throat. That's when Silas saw it, something that shouldn't exist in this landlocked wilderness, something that belonged to oceans he'd only seen in books. And somehow, impossibly, it was calling to him. The shell lay partially buried in the riverbank gravel, as if the spring floods had deposited it there like driftwood. But this was no ordinary piece of debris. The conch shell was enormous, easily the size of a football, with spiraling chambers that caught the morning light and threw it back in iridescent waves of pink and gold. Its surface was smooth as polished marble, without the pitting and wear that should have marked something tumbled by mountain waters. Silas stood transfixed, his mind struggling to process what his eyes were telling him. He'd seen conch shells before, during his brief stint at a naval base in California after Korea. They belonged to warm, tropical seas, not to cold mountain rivers 1,000 miles from the nearest ocean. Yet here it was, impossible as snow in July. Whiskey had stopped his restless circling and now sat rigid as a statue, his attention fixed on the shell with an intensity that raised goosebumps along Silas's arms. The dog's ears were pinned back, and a low rumble emanated from deep in his chest. Not quite a growl, but something more primal, more uncertain. "Easy, boy," Silas murmured, though his own heart was beating faster than it should have been. He knelt beside the shell, noting how the gravel around it seemed different, cleaner somehow, as if the very presence of the object had purified the stones. When he reached toward it, Whiskey let out a sharp bark, the first sound the dog had made all morning. Silas paused, his hand inches from the shell's glossy surface. In all their years together, Whiskey had never interfered with his actions, never shown anything but trust in his judgment. But now the dog was on his feet, tail tucked low, every line of his body radiating alarm. "What's got you spooked?" Silas asked, though he could feel it too, something that made his skin crawl with anticipation, as if the air itself was holding its breath. The shell was warm, not sun-warmed, for the morning light had barely reached this shaded spot along the bank. This was an internal warmth, like something alive. As Silas's fingers made contact with the smooth surface, he felt a subtle vibration, almost like a heartbeat. Whiskey whined and backed away several steps, but Silas found himself drawn closer. The shell seemed to pulse with gentle light from within, and he could swear he heard something, a sound so faint it might have been his imagination, like distant music or voices carried on wind. Martha had always been the one to embrace mysteries, to find magic in the everyday world. "There's more going on around us than we can see," she used to say, watching clouds form shapes in the sky or listening to night sounds in the forest. Just because we can't explain something doesn't mean it isn't real. Silas had been the practical one, the skeptic who believed in what he could touch and measure. 20 years of solitude had worn down some of that certainty, but this challenged everything he thought he understood about the natural world. He lifted the shell carefully, surprised by its weight. It was heavier than it looked, dense as stone but smooth as silk. The moment his hands wrapped around it, the vibration intensified, and he could definitely hear something now, a sound like ocean waves. Though the nearest sea was half a continent away, Whiskey let out another sharp bark, more urgent this time. The dog was backing toward the trail, clearly wanting to retreat to the safety of familiar ground. But Silas couldn't tear himself away. The shell was beautiful in a way that made his chest tight with longing. It reminded him of something, though he couldn't place what, as he turned the shell in his hands. Examining its perfect spirals and impossible luster, he noticed something else, a hairline crack running along one of the chambers. It was barely visible, like a flaw in fine crystal, but it seemed to glow with the same internal light that pulsed through the whole shell. The crack was recent. Silas could tell because the edges were sharp, unweathered. Something had damaged this ancient thing, created a weakness in its structure. As he ran his thumb along the crack, the vibration increased, and the sound within grew clearer. Not ocean waves, something else. Something that made his hand shake. It sounded like Martha's voice. The realization hit him like a physical blow, and he nearly dropped the shell into the river. That was impossible. Martha had been dead for 20 years. Her voice existed only in his memories now, growing fainter each year, despite his efforts to hold on to every inflection. Every laugh, but this was her voice, soft and warm and calling his name. Whiskey was barking in earnest now, a series of sharp, desperate sounds that echoed off the canyon walls. The dog had retreated all the way to the base of the trail and was looking back with eyes that held too much intelligence, too much understanding. Silas closed his eyes and listened. There it was again, Martha's voice, muffled by the shell's chambers, but unmistakably hers. She was saying something, words he couldn't quite make out, but the tone was urgent, important. His hands found the crack again, and without conscious thought, he began to work at it with his thumbnails. The shell's surface was harder than it looked, but the crack was a weakness, a place where pressure might accomplish what force could not. The voice grew stronger as the crack widened. Martha was speaking in sentences now, though the words remained indistinct. Silas's heart hammered against his ribs as 20 years of careful acceptance began to crumble. He'd made his peace with her death, learned to live with the silence she'd left behind. But if she was somehow speaking to him through this impossible shell, if there was a chance to hear her voice again, to know what she wanted to tell him, the crack spread with a sound like breaking glass, and suddenly the shell split open in his hands. Light poured out, not the harsh glare of electricity, but something softer, warmer, like candlelight filtered through honey. It bathed Silas's face and hands in golden radiance, and for a moment he couldn't see anything but that gentle glow. When his vision cleared, he found himself holding two halves of the conch shell, their interiors lined with mother-of-pearl that seemed to capture and reflect the morning sky. But nestled in the largest chamber, glowing with its own inner light, was a folded piece of paper. Not just any paper. This was heavy stock, cream-colored, with a texture he recognized. Martha had always insisted on good stationery for important letters, the kind with cotton fibers that would last for decades. And the handwriting visible through the fold was unmistakably hers, the careful cursive she'd learned in a one-room schoolhouse, with its distinctive loops and flourishes. Silas's hands trembled as he reached for the letter. Whiskey had fallen silent, and even the river seemed to have quieted its eternal murmur. The entire world had contracted to this moment, this impossible gift that challenged everything he thought he knew about death and loss and the nature of reality itself. Martha's letter, written in her own hand, sealed inside a shell that had no business existing in this mountain wilderness. As his fingers touched the paper, still warm from its strange vessel, Silas felt the last 20 years of his carefully constructed life begin to shift and crack, like ice breaking up on the river in spring. Whatever message Martha had sent him across the void between life and death, whatever words she'd thought important enough to deliver through such extraordinary means, he was about to discover. And somehow he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Silas carried the letter back to his cabin like a man in a trance, the broken shell cradled in his other arm. Whiskey followed at a distance, still skittish but unwilling to abandon his master to face this strangeness alone. The dog's behavior troubled Silas almost as much as the impossible discovery itself. In 13 years, Whiskey had never shown fear of anything supernatural, because until today, there had been nothing supernatural to fear. Back on the familiar porch, Silas settled into the old wooden chair where he'd spent countless evenings watching the sun disappear behind the western peaks. The letter felt heavier than its actual weight, dense with possibilities that made his chest tight. He set the shell halves on the small table beside his chair, noting how they continued to emit that soft, warm glow even in daylight. The paper was exactly as he remembered Martha's stationery, thick and smooth, with a faint watermark visible when held to the light. Her name and their address were embossed at the top in elegant script: Mrs. Martha Elizabeth Boone, Bitterroot Range, Montana. She'd ordered the stationery from a catalogue shortly after they were married, declaring that a woman needed proper writing materials for important correspondence. But who are you going to write to up here? Silas had teased her. The nearest neighbor is 15 miles away, and the postal service doesn't even know we exist. "You never know," she'd replied, with that mysterious smile of hers. Important words need a proper place to live. Now, 20 years after her death, those words seemed prophetic. Important words indeed, important enough to travel through realms Silas couldn't begin to understand. His hands shook as he unfolded the letter. The handwriting was definitely Martha's. Each letter formed with the careful precision she'd learned from the nuns at Sacred Heart Academy. But the paper showed no signs of age, no yellowing, no brittleness, no fading of the ink. It looked as if it had been written yesterday. "My dearest Silas," it began, and his heart clenched at the familiar endearment. He could hear her voice speaking the words, feel the warmth of her hand covering his. "If you're reading this, then the shell has found its way to you at last. I know how strange this must seem, how impossible. You were always the practical one, the man who believed in what he could see and touch. But love, my darling, love is the most practical magic of all. I've been waiting for the right moment to reach you, waiting for your heart to be ready to receive what I need to tell you. 20 years is a long time to carry grief, and I've watched you shoulder that burden with the same quiet strength that made me fall in love with you. But there are things you need to know, things I couldn't tell you before I died, the morning I passed from this world to whatever comes next. I felt your hand holding mine, felt your love anchoring me even as my spirit began to drift. That love, our love, it doesn't end with death, Silas. It becomes something else, something that can reach across the boundaries between worlds when the need is great enough. You've been faithful to my memory, more faithful than I ever asked you to be. But faithfulness to the dead shouldn't mean abandoning the living. There's something coming, my love, something that will test everything you think you know about yourself and about the choices we made together. In the old trunk in our bedroom, beneath the quilts my grandmother made, you'll find a bundle wrapped in blue cloth. I hid it there before I got sick, knowing somehow that you'd need it someday. Inside is my journal from the year before we met, and a photograph I never showed you. You'll understand why when you see it. The shell is just the beginning, Silas. There are others coming, others who knew me before I became your wife, who carry secrets I thought were safely buried. You must be ready for them. And to be ready, you must know the truth about who I was before I climbed this mountain to share your life. I loved you completely, without reservation, from the moment you offered me your coat that day at the church social. Nothing I'm about to reveal changes that truth. But love built on partial knowledge is like a house with a weak foundation. It may stand for years, but when the storms come, it cannot endure what it was meant to endure. Go to the trunk, my darling. Read my words from those long-ago days. Look at the photograph with open eyes and an open heart. And remember, whatever you discover, whatever questions arise, I chose you. I chose our life together. I chose to leave that other world behind because what we built here was more real, more true than anything I'd known before. But that other world hasn't forgotten me, and it hasn't forgotten the thing I took when I left. They're coming for it, Silas, and when they arrive, you'll need to understand what you're protecting and why it matters. Trust Whiskey. He senses things we cannot. Trust your instincts. They're sharper than you know. And trust our love. It's stronger than death, stronger than time, stronger than the forces that seek to undo what we built together. This is not goodbye, my love. This is preparation. When the time comes, you'll know what to do. You'll know because I'll be there with you, just as I've been there all along, watching over you from whatever realm holds those who love too deeply to ever truly leave. All my love. Yesterday, today, and forever, Martha P.S. The raven that visits your porch each morning isn't just any bird. She's been my messenger all these years, making sure you were safe, making sure you remembered to eat and tend to yourself. Her name is Temperance, and she understands more than you might think. Silas read the letter 3 times before setting it down with trembling hands. Each reading revealed new layers of meaning, new questions that made his head spin. A journal, a photograph, secrets from Martha's past that apparently involved supernatural forces and something she'd stolen, and Temperance, the sleek black raven that had indeed visited his porch nearly every mourning for the past 20 years. He'd grown fond of the bird, often sharing scraps of his breakfast, talking to her as if she were a friend. The idea that she was somehow connected to Martha, that she'd been watching over him all this time. Whiskey had settled at the foot of the porch steps, but his ears remained pricked forward, alert for sounds that Silas couldn't hear. The dog's unease was infectious, adding weight to Martha's warning about others coming. Silas looked toward the bedroom window, knowing that somewhere in the old trunk beneath layers of quilts and memories lay answers to questions he'd never thought to ask. For 20 years, he'd believed he knew everything there was to know about his wife. Now it seemed he'd known only the woman she'd chosen to become, not the woman she'd been before. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the last wisps of mist and warming the air enough that he should have felt comfortable. Instead, a chill ran down his spine as he contemplated the magnitude of what Martha was asking him to accept. Magic, supernatural forces, a past that wasn't past at all, but merely sleeping, waiting for the right moment to resurface. He folded the letter carefully and stood, his joints protesting after sitting motionless for so long. Whatever lay in that trunk, whatever truths awaited him, he knew there was no turning back. The shell had found him, the letter had been delivered, and somewhere in the distance, forces were already in motion. It was time to discover who Martha Elizabeth Boone had really been. The old trunk sat in the corner of their bedroom like a sleeping giant, its brass corners tarnished with age and its leather straps cracked from decades of mountain winters. Silas had helped Martha carry it up the narrow stairs when they first moved into the cabin, and he'd never given much thought to its contents. She'd told him it held family keepsakes, her grandmother's quilts, some books, a few photographs, personal things from her life before they met. Now, standing before it with Martha's letter still warm in his pocket, Silas felt like a trespasser in his own home. The bedroom had remained largely unchanged since her death. Her hairbrush still sat on the dresser, a few silver strands caught in its bristles. Her favorite books lined the shelf beside the window. Her reading glasses lay folded on the nightstand, waiting for eyes that would never again need their help. Whiskey had followed him upstairs, but remained in the doorway, unwilling to enter the room where his beloved mistress had drawn her final breath. The dog's behavior reinforced Silas's sense that he was crossing a threshold, stepping into territory that had been forbidden for reasons he was only beginning to understand. The trunk's lid opened with a protest of old hinges, releasing the scent of lavender and cedar that Martha had used to protect her treasures from moths and time. Layers of quilts lay folded with precise care, the wedding ring pattern her grandmother had stitched, the log cabin design that had covered their bed during their first winter together, the star quilt that Martha had worked on during the long months of her illness. Beneath the quilts, wrapped in blue cloth just as the letter had promised, was a bundle that made Silas's breath catch. The fabric was silk, faded but still beautiful, the color of a summer sky just before dawn. His fingers traced the delicate material as he lifted it from its hiding place, noting how it seemed to shimmer with the same subtle light that had emanated from the shell. Inside the silk wrapping was a leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth by countless hands. The leather was an unusual color, deep green, with veins of gold running through it like mineral deposits in stone. No craftsman Silas had ever met could have produced such work. The binding was held together with silver wire, and the pages were thick parchment that felt ancient beneath his fingertips. Beneath the journal lay a photograph in a silver frame, face down, as if Martha couldn't bear to look at whatever image it contained. Silas turned it over and felt the world shift beneath his feet. The photograph showed Martha, but not as he had ever known her. She was younger, perhaps 25, and dressed in clothing that belonged to no earthly fashion. Her gown was white as fresh snow, but it seemed to move in the photograph, fabric flowing like water despite the stillness of the image. Her hair, which he had known as brown with threads of silver, blazed copper red in the strange light that illuminated the scene. But it was her eyes that stopped his heart. They glowed with the same internal light he'd seen in the shell, and they held knowledge that was both terrible and beautiful. This was not the gentle schoolteacher he'd fallen in love with. This was someone else entirely, someone powerful, otherworldly, magnificent and frightening in equal measure. Behind her in the photograph stood others dressed in similar garments, men and women with that same otherworldly beauty, that same luminous gaze. They stood in what appeared to be a great hall built from crystal and starlight, its walls curving upward beyond the frame of the image, and in Martha's hands, clearly visible despite the photograph's age, was an object that made Silas's knees weak. It was a sphere of pure light, no larger than a baseball, but so brilliant that it seemed to illuminate the entire scene. The sphere pulsed with energy, and even through the static medium of the photograph, Silas could sense its power. With shaking hands, he opened the journal to the first page. Martha's handwriting filled the parchment, but the words were in a language he didn't recognize, flowing script that seemed to dance across the page like living things. As he stared at the incomprehensible text, the letters began to shift and change, rearranging themselves into English before his eyes. Day of the 7th moon, year of the crystal tide, the first entry began. The council has given me a final chance to prove my worth, though I fear I'm not equal to the task they have set before me. The luminous stone chooses its own guardian, and it has rejected every candidate they have presented. If I cannot convince it to accept me, I will be cast out of the celestial realm forever, but perhaps that would not be such a terrible fate. I've grown weary of the politics and power games that consume my people. The beauty of our realm has become hollow to me, its perfection a prison. I find myself dreaming of simpler worlds, of lives lived without the burden of cosmic responsibility. The stone speaks to me in whispers, showing me visions of a place where mountains touch the sky and rivers run cold and clear. It shows me a man with kind eyes and gentle hands, a man who knows nothing of magic or power, but everything about love and loyalty. I do not understand these visions, but they comfort me in ways that all our celestial glories cannot. Silas turned the page, his heart hammering as he began to understand the magnitude of what Martha had hidden from him. She wasn't human, at least not in the way he understood humanity. She came from somewhere else, somewhere that existed beyond the boundaries of his world. And she had stolen something precious, something called the luminous stone, to escape that otherworldly realm and build a life with him. The next entry was dated 3 months later. I have taken the stone and fled. The council will never forgive me, but I care nothing for their judgment. The visions have grown stronger, and I know now that my destiny lies not in the crystal halls of our realm, but in the arms of a mortal man who will love me for what I choose to become, not what I was born to be. I have found the place from my dreams, a valley in the mountains where the air tastes of freedom and the silence speaks of peace. Tonight I will perform the ritual of becoming, using the stone's power to transform myself into something that can exist in this simpler world. I will become human, with all the limitations and joys that mortality brings. If I am successful, I will hide the stone where none of my people can find it. And I will live as Martha Elizabeth Hartwell, schoolteacher and seeker of quiet happiness. The woman I was before, Seraphina of the 9th house, guardian candidate of the luminous stone, she will exist only in these pages, a memory of a life I gladly leave behind. The journal slipped from Silas's nerveless fingers as the full truth hit him. Martha, his Martha, had been something far more than human. She had been a being of such power that she could steal cosmic artifacts and transform her very nature for love. She had given up immortality, magic, an entire realm of existence, to become mortal and share his simple mountain life. And now, 20 years after her death, that abandoned world was coming to reclaim what she had taken. 3 days passed in a haze of revelation and growing dread. Silas read Martha's journal from cover to cover, each entry painting a clearer picture of the woman he thought he'd known completely. The final pages detailed her transformation, a ritual so complex and dangerous that even beings of immense power rarely attempted it. "The stone fights me," she had written in her last entry before becoming human. It knows what I intend and it resists. But my will is stronger than its programming. I call upon the deepest magics, the ones that reshape the very fabric of existence. Tonight Seraphina dies and Martha is born. The entry ended there. But loose pages tucked into the journal's back cover continued the story in a different hand. Still Martha's, but changed, more tentative, as if written by someone learning to be human. I remember everything, but it feels like someone else's life, the first loose page began. The power is gone, drained into the transformation. I'm mortal now, fragile as any human woman, but my heart is light for the first time in centuries. Tomorrow I will find the schoolhouse in Hamilton. Tomorrow I begin the life I chose. Silas found himself touching that page repeatedly, amazed by the sacrifice she had made. To abandon immortality, to surrender abilities that could reshape reality itself, all for the chance to love a man she had seen only in visions. The magnitude of it staggered him, but the journal also revealed darker truths. Martha's people, the Celestials, did not forgive theft. They did not forget transgressions. The luminous stone was apparently one of their most sacred artifacts, a source of power that maintained the balance between realms. Without it, their world was slowly dying, and they would do anything to get it back. On the fourth day, Temperance the Raven began behaving strangely. Instead of her usual morning visit for breadcrumbs and conversation, she arrived before dawn, cawing urgently outside Silas's bedroom window. When he stumbled downstairs to the porch, she led him to the edge of the clearing, where strange marks had appeared in the soft earth overnight. The symbols were burned into the ground as if branded by fire, forming a perfect circle around his property. They looked like a combination of letters and geometric shapes, but from no alphabet Silas had ever seen. The marks glowed faintly in the pre-dawn darkness, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Whiskey refused to cross the burned circle, whining and backing away whenever Silas tried to lead him past the symbols. The dog's distress was infectious, and Silas found himself checking and rechecking the rifle he kept by the door, though he suspected conventional weapons would be useless against whatever was coming. The journal had mentioned protective circles, wards that could hide things from celestial sight. But these marks felt different, not protective but predatory, like a snare closing around its prey. As full daylight arrived, Silas noticed other changes. The forest around his cabin had grown unnaturally quiet. No birdsong, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Even the ever-present hum of insects had ceased. It was as if the natural world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The temperature began dropping despite the clear sky, and by noon, frost was forming on the cabin's windows. Silas built up the fire in the hearth, but the cold seemed to seep through the walls themselves, settling into his bones with a chill that had nothing to do with weather. That evening, as he sat reading more of Martha's journal by firelight, Temperance returned. But she wasn't alone. 7 ravens perched along the porch railing, their black eyes fixed on something beyond the clearing that Silas couldn't see. They didn't caw or rustle their feathers, they simply watched, silent as death. Through the window, Silas caught glimpses of movement at the forest's edge, shadows that didn't match the trees that cast them, shapes that seemed to flow like water one moment and solidify like stone the next. Whatever was out there was testing the burned circle, looking for weaknesses in whatever magic bound it. The journal had warned of this. Martha's final human entries spoke of contingency plans, of hiding places and protective measures she'd put in place during their early years together. She'd known this day would come, had prepared for it even as she built a mortal life filled with simple pleasures and quiet love. "If they find me," one passage read, "they will not be gentle." Celestials view transformation as the ultimate blasphemy, and theft of the luminous stone as treason beyond forgiveness. But the stone itself will protect whoever guards it if they are worthy. It chooses its own champions, just as it chose me long ago. Silas closed the journal and looked toward the hiding place Martha had described, a loose stone in the hearth's foundation, hidden behind a carefully placed iron poker. 20 years of fires had heated that stone, 20 years of mountain winters had tested its concealment. But according to the journal, that was where she had hidden the luminous stone after her transformation. Standing, he moved to the fireplace and felt along the stones until he found the one that shifted slightly under pressure. Behind it was a cavity lined with the same blue silk that had wrapped the journal, and within that silk, light exploded through the room as his fingers touched the stone. Not harsh light, but something warm and welcoming, like sunshine filtered through honey. The sphere was smaller than he'd expected from the photograph, no larger than a child's marble, but it pulsed with such power that the air around it seemed to sing. The moment his skin made contact with the stone, Silas's world changed. Suddenly he could see the creatures outside the circle clearly, tall, impossibly beautiful beings in flowing robes that seemed to be cut from starlight itself. Their faces were perfect, unmarked by age or emotion, and their eyes burned with cold fire. But more than seeing them, he could feel their intentions, their thoughts, their centuries of patient waiting. They had found Martha's trail at last, tracked the stone signature across the barriers between worlds. They had come to reclaim what was stolen and to punish the thief who had dared to love more than duty. The stone's power flowed through him, showing him glimpses of the cosmic forces at play. He saw the celestial realm, a world of crystal spires and floating islands, where beings of pure energy maintained the balance between creation and destruction. He saw their dying realm, starved of the power the luminous stone provided, its beautiful inhabitants slowly fading like flowers in drought. And he saw Martha as she truly was, not a thief, but a guardian who had recognized that love was more powerful than duty, that choosing life over perfection was the highest form of courage. The celestials outside the circle began to move, testing the barrier with tendrils of pure force that made the burned symbols flare brighter. Soon they would find a way through, and when they did, they would expect to face a simple mountain man armed with nothing but grief and ignorance. Instead, they would find the new guardian of the luminous stone, chosen not by cosmic councils but by love itself. The stone's power brought knowledge, but it came at a price. Silas found himself experiencing Martha's memories as if they were his own, not just the events she'd recorded in her journal, but deeper recollections that painted a complete picture of her former existence. He saw the celestial realm in its prime, when the luminous stone rested in the great crystal chamber at the heart of their world. The stone was more than an artifact. It was the living heart of their civilization, a concentrated fragment of the cosmic force that had birthed the stars themselves. Its light fed their cities, powered their magic, and maintained the delicate balance that kept their realm from sliding into the void between worlds. Martha, Seraphina, had been chosen as a potential guardian because of her unique ability to commune with the stone, while others approached it with reverence and fear. She had spoken to it as one might speak to a dear friend. The stone had responded, showing her wonders beyond the celestial realm, glimpses of other worlds where life took different forms and love meant different things. But with the memories came an understanding of what the Celestials truly were. They were not evil, not conquerors seeking to dominate lesser worlds. They were refugees, survivors of a cosmic catastrophe that had destroyed countless realms. The Celestial realm was their last sanctuary, and the luminous stone was all that kept it from following their lost worlds into oblivion. Martha's theft hadn't been simple greed or rebellion. It had been the desperate act of a being who saw no other way to claim the love she'd glimpsed in her visions. But her choice had condemned her people to a slow death, their world gradually fading as the stone's absence took its inevitable toll. Standing in his cabin with the stone's light warming his hands, Silas felt the weight of that knowledge crushing down on him. Martha had traded an entire civilization for their love. Thousands, perhaps millions, of Celestials were dying because she had chosen to become human and share his simple mountain life. Outside, the creatures beyond the circle had grown bolder. They spoke among themselves in voices like crystal chimes, their words carrying clearly through the cabin's walls, despite being in a language that predated human civilization. The stone translated their meaning, flooding Silas's mind with their urgent discussions. "The thief's essence lingers here," one was saying. "She died in mortal form, but her spirit touched this place deeply. The stone has chosen a new guardian. I can feel its defiance." "A human," another replied with distaste. "How can a creature that lives for barely a century hope to understand cosmic responsibility? We should simply take what was stolen and return home." "The stone will not allow it," a third voice interrupted. This one was different, older, weighted with authority. "It has accepted this mortal as its keeper. We must convince him to surrender it willingly, or the stone itself will resist our efforts to reclaim it. Then we are trapped here until he dies naturally," the first voice said bitterly. "Humans are fragile. We need only wait." "Our realm cannot wait," the elder voice replied. "Each day of delay costs us more lives. If persuasion fails, we must consider alternatives." The conversation continued, but Silas had heard enough. They were willing to kill him if necessary, but they preferred to convince him to give up the stone voluntarily. That suggested they weren't entirely without conscience. But it also meant they would escalate their tactics if he continued to resist. Whiskey had remained close to Silas since the stone's activation, the dog's behavior shifting from fearful to protective. The old hound seemed to sense the magnitude of what was happening, positioning himself between his master and the windows as if ready to defend against threats that transcended the physical world. Temperance and her 6 companions had not moved from the porch railing, their vigil continuing through the night and into the following day. Their presence was oddly comforting, Martha's messengers standing guard, just as she had promised in her letter. As the second day of the siege wore on, Silas found himself remembering conversations with Martha that took on new meaning in light of his revelations. Her fascination with astronomy, her uncanny ability to predict weather patterns, her insistence on preserving certain rituals and traditions that she claimed were just family customs. He remembered how she would sometimes stand outside on clear nights, staring at constellations with an expression of profound longing. When he asked what she was thinking about, she would smile sadly and say, "Old friends in faraway places." He had assumed she meant childhood companions from whatever distant city she'd grown up in. Now he understood she was looking at the stars themselves, remembering the beings she'd left behind. The journal contained detailed instructions for communicating with the stone, methods Martha had developed during her years as its guardian. Following her notes, Silas learned to quiet his mind and listen to the artifact's gentle whispers. What he discovered both amazed and terrified him. The stone was alive, not in any biological sense, but as a consciousness that had existed since the birth of the universe. It had chosen countless guardians over the eons, beings from different worlds and different forms of life, but always individuals who understood that true power came from love rather than dominion. Martha had been exceptional even among its chosen guardians. Her willingness to sacrifice her immortal nature for the sake of love had impressed the stone so deeply that it had aided her transformation, providing power she shouldn't have been able to access. It had helped hide her from celestial tracking, maintained the protective wards around their property, and even guided Silas to the shell that contained her final message. But the stone also revealed a troubling truth. Its absence was indeed killing the celestial realm, just as the beings outside claimed. Their beautiful ethereal world was slowly losing cohesion, drifting toward dissolution as the cosmic forces that held it together gradually weakened. However, there was another option, one that neither Martha nor the Celestials had considered. The stone could be divided, its power shared between the celestial realm and whoever it chose as its earthly guardian. Such a division had never been attempted, and the risks were enormous. Success would save both worlds, but failure would destroy the stone entirely, dooming the Celestials, while stripping its guardian of the power needed to protect the fragment that remained. The choice the stone whispered in its crystalline voice. Belonged to Silas. He could return the artifact to the Celestials and honor their claim, keeping Martha's secret and living out his remaining years in the mountains she had loved. He could refuse their demands and fight to keep the stone, though such resistance would eventually cost both his life and theirs, or he could attempt the impossible, splitting a cosmic artifact that had existed since creation began, gambling everything on a solution that had never been tried. On the fifth morning, the pattern broke. Instead of maintaining their vigilant circle around his property, the Celestials withdrew to the forest's edge, and a single figure approached the burned barrier. Unlike the others, this being appeared almost human, smaller in stature, with features that seemed familiar despite their otherworldly perfection. Silas watched from his window as the figure raised one hand and spoke in English, the words carrying clearly across the clearing despite the distance. "Silas Boone," the voice called, and his heart nearly stopped. The tone, the inflection, the slight musical quality that had made him fall in love with spoken poetry. It was Martha's voice, coming from a stranger's throat. "I know you can hear me," the figure continued. "I know you have the journal, the photograph, the stone itself. But there are things Seraphina never told you, truths she hid even from herself. Will you listen to what her sister has come so far to say?" Sister, the word hit Silas like a physical blow. Martha had never mentioned family, had claimed to be an orphan, raised by distant relatives who died before they met. Yet here stood a being who shared her voice, her graceful movements, even the way she tilted her head when making an important point. Against every instinct, screaming at him to stay hidden, Silas walked to his front door. The luminous stone pulsed warmly in his pocket, its power forming a protective barrier around him as he stepped onto the porch. Whiskey followed but remained close to the door, ready to retreat if danger threatened. "You have Martha's voice," Silas called across the clearing. "But you're not her," the figure smiled, and the expression was so achingly familiar that Silas had to grip the porch railing to keep from collapsing. "I am Celestine of the 9th house, twin sister to the one you knew as Martha. We shared the same voice, the same mannerisms, even the same thoughts during our early centuries. Celestial twins are rare. We're born as two halves of a single soul." She gestured to the burned symbols, marking the barrier between them. "May I cross? I give you my word that I come in peace, seeking only conversation. The others grow impatient with diplomacy, but I believe understanding is still possible." The stone whispered cautions in Silas's mind, but something in Celestine's manner reminded him so strongly of Martha that he found himself nodding. "Come ahead, but slowly, and keep your hands where I can see them." Celestine stepped across the barrier, and Silas felt the protective magic part like water before her. She was beautiful in the way all Celestials were beautiful, but her loveliness was tempered by something that looked like grief. As she drew closer, he could see that her perfect features bore traces of the same sadness that had sometimes shadowed Martha's face during quiet moments. "She looked just like you," Silas said, his voice rougher than he'd intended, when she was young in that photograph. "But she was happier as a human, I think. More at peace." "She was," Celestine agreed, stopping at the base of the porch steps. "Seraphina always struggled with the burden of immortality, the endless responsibilities that came with our nature. When the stone showed her visions of mortal love, she saw an escape from everything that trapped her in our world. You make it sound like she was running away from something more than just duty." Celestine's laugh was bitter, so unlike Martha's gentle humor that it drove home how different the sisters truly were. "Oh, she was. You see, Silas, there's a truth that Seraphina never recorded in her journal, a secret she buried so deeply that even the stone's memories don't contain it. She wasn't just any potential guardian, she was the stone's chosen successor, destined to become its permanent keeper when our current guardian passed into the next realm." The revelation hit Silas like cold water. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that our guardian is dying, has been dying for over a century now. The stone should have passed to Seraphina 50 years ago, but she ran before the transition could occur. Without a true guardian to focus its power, the stone cannot maintain our realm's stability. We're not just missing an artifact, Silas. We're missing the living link between the stone and our world. Silas felt the luminous stone pulse more urgently in his pocket, and suddenly he understood the deeper layer of Martha's sacrifice. She hadn't just stolen a sacred object, she had abandoned her destiny as the keeper of her people's survival. The weight of an entire civilization's existence had rested on her shoulders, and she had chosen love over cosmic responsibility. The others don't know, do they? He asked. They think you're here to retrieve stolen property, not to convince the stone's rightful guardian to accept her destiny. Most don't know, Celestine confirmed. The council keeps the succession secret until the transition occurs. But I know because I am her twin, and I have been preparing to take her place if she cannot be convinced to return. And can you? Take her place, I mean? Celestine's composure cracked, revealing pain that made her appear suddenly fragile despite her immortal nature. The stone has rejected me repeatedly. Twin souls we may be, but I lack whatever quality made Serafina worthy. The stone will only accept its chosen guardian, and its chosen guardian is dead. She looked up at him, with eyes that held the weight of centuries. But you hold it now, and it has not rejected you. That means something, Silas. The stone sees in you whatever it saw in my sister. Perhaps the love she bore you? Perhaps the sacrifice she made to be with you? Somehow, her connection to you has made you worthy in the stone's estimation. The implications crashed over Silas like an avalanche. The stone hadn't just chosen him as a temporary guardian. It was offering him Martha's abandoned destiny. He could become the true guardian, the living link between the artifact and the celestial realm. He could save Martha's people from the slow death her choice had condemned them to, but such a transformation would require him to leave his humanity behind, just as Martha had abandoned her immortal nature. He would have to give up everything that made him who he was, his mortality, his simple mountain life, his connection to the physical world he loved. There's another way, Celestine continued, as if reading his thoughts. The stone could be divided, as you've already considered. But such a division requires the willing sacrifice of someone who loves both the stone and its chosen guardian more than life itself. Someone who understands the true cost of cosmic responsibility. Martha, Silas whispered. Her spirit lingers, Celestine confirmed. The transformation she underwent left echoes of her essence bound to this place, sustained by her love for you and her connection to the stone. With her willing aid, the artifact could be safely split, part remaining here with you, part returning to sustain our realm. But calling her spirit forth for such a purpose would require her to abandon whatever peace she has found in death. She would have to relive the pain of her choice, accept the guilt of her people's suffering, and sacrifice herself once more for the sake of love. The wind picked up, rustling the pine boughs and carrying the scent of snow despite the season. Somewhere in that wind, Silas thought he heard a whisper of familiar laughter, warm and sad and infinitely loving. Martha was here, had been here all along, waiting for him to need her guidance one final time. The question was whether he could ask her to make such a sacrifice, whether their love was worth the price it would exact from her eternal rest. Celestine watched his face carefully, reading the conflict in his expression. The choice is yours, Silas, but choose quickly. The council grows impatient, and there are those among us who would take the stone by force, rather than watch our world die waiting for human sentimentality to resolve itself. As if summoned by her words, the other Celestials emerged from the forest, their perfect faces showing the first signs of emotion Silas had seen: desperation, determination, and the cold resolve of beings who had nothing left to lose. The tension in the clearing was thick enough to cut with a blade. 8 Celestials stood at the forest's edge, their patience visibly fraying as their beautiful faces showed signs of strain that spoke to their realm's desperate condition. Celestine remained on Silas's porch, her presence a fragile bridge between two worlds that seemed destined for conflict. "How long do we have?" Silas asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Hours, perhaps less, Celestine replied. Our realm's stability decreases with each passing moment. The council sent us with instructions to retrieve the stone by any means necessary. They would prefer willing cooperation, but they'll kill me if they have to, Silas finished. Yes, and they have the power to do so, despite the stone's protection. 8 celestials working in concert can overwhelm even cosmic artifacts. Though the effort would likely destroy us all, Silas looked out at Martha's people, for that's how he'd come to think of them, and saw his own mortality reflected in their desperate faces. They weren't evil beings bent on conquest. They were refugees watching their last sanctuary crumble, parents seeing their children fade away, survivors of cosmic catastrophe facing extinction because one of their own had chosen love over duty. The luminous stone pulsed against his chest, its warm weight both comfort and burden. Through its power he could sense Martha's presence more clearly now, not quite a ghost, but an echo of consciousness that had been sustained by love and cosmic energy for 20 years. She was waiting, had been waiting all this time, for him to call upon her one final time. But what Celestine was asking, what the situation demanded, would require Martha to experience again all the pain she had suffered in choosing mortality. Worse, it would force her to confront the consequences of that choice, the slow death of her people that her decision had caused. Could he ask the woman he loved to bear such agony, even to save 2 worlds? Whiskey pressed closer to his legs, the old dog's warmth anchoring him to the present moment. Temperance and her companions watched from the porch railing, their dark eyes reflecting depths of understanding that reminded him these were no ordinary birds. They were Martha's messengers, bound to her will even in death, waiting to see what choice her beloved would make. "There's something you should know," Silas said finally, his voice carrying across the clearing to the waiting celestials. "I understand why Martha Seraphina ran from her destiny. I've seen what the stone can do, felt its power, and I know what it costs to bear such responsibility." The lead celestial, the one whose voice carried the weight of authority, stepped forward. "Then you understand why we cannot simply walk away. Our world depends on the stone's return." "I do understand," Silas replied, "just as I understand why she chose love over duty. Some things are worth more than cosmic responsibility." A murmur of discontent rippled through the assembled celestials, but their leader raised a hand for silence. "You speak of love as if it justifies abandoning millions to death. How can mortal affection outweigh such devastation?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Silas found himself thinking of all the conversations he'd had with Martha about the nature of love, the purpose of existence, the value of a single life against the vast sweep of cosmic time. "Because," he said slowly, working through thoughts that had been forming since the first moment he'd held the stone, "love isn't just an emotion. It's a force of creation, a power that builds rather than destroys. Martha didn't abandon her people out of selfishness. She discovered something your cosmic councils don't understand. True guardianship isn't about duty or sacrifice. It's about choosing to protect what matters most, even when that choice seems impossible." He pulled the luminous stone from his pocket, letting its light spill across the clearing like liquid starshine. The assembled celestials gasped as they saw their lost artifact again, its radiance undimmed by 2 decades of exile. The stone chose Martha because she understood that love is the strongest force in the universe, Silas continued. "And it chose me because I learned that lesson from her. But that same love, the love that brought her to this mountain, that's what's going to save both our worlds." Celestine's eyes widened as she grasped his meaning. "You're going to attempt the division. You're going to call her spirit forth and ask her to sacrifice herself again." "Not sacrifice," Silas corrected. "Transform! Just like she transformed herself from immortal to mortal, she can help transform the stone from singular artifact to dual existence. But only if she chooses to do so freely, without coercion or guilt." The lead celestial's perfect features showed the first crack of hope. "The division has never been attempted. The risks are mine to take," Silas interrupted. Martha taught me that some choices are too important to be safe. This is one of them. He closed his eyes and reached out through the stone's power, calling to the echo of consciousness that had waited 20 years for this moment. The response was immediate, warmth flooding through him like sunrise after the longest night, familiar love wrapping around his soul like coming home. Silas. Martha's voice whispered through dimensions, as clear as if she stood beside him. My darling, I've been waiting so long to tell you how proud I am of the man you've become. Martha, he whispered aloud, and saw Celestine's tears as she recognized her sister's presence. I need to ask you something, and I need you to know you can say no. I'll understand. I know what you're going to ask, she replied, her voice carrying the sadness of someone who had watched from beyond death as consequences unfolded. I've seen what my choice cost my people. I've felt their suffering across the barriers between worlds. The guilt has been my companion these 20 years. Then you know this isn't just about saving them. If we attempt this division and fail, we'll destroy the stone entirely, dooming both worlds. Her presence flickered, showing the strain of maintaining communication across the boundary between life and death. Yes, I understand the stakes, just as I understand that you're willing to risk everything because that's what love demands. Not the safe choice, but the right one. The assembled Celestials watched in amazement as Martha's presence became visible, a translucent figure materializing beside Silas like morning mist given form. She looked exactly as she had in life, but with an ethereal quality that spoke to her transformed state. Sister, Celestine breathed. Taking a step forward, Martha's spirit turned to face her twin, and Silas felt the complex emotions flowing between them. Love, regret, forgiveness, and hope mingled together like colors in a prism. Celestine, Martha said, her voice now audible to all present. You've grown so beautiful, so strong. I'm sorry I left you to bear the burden alone. I never understood, Celestine replied, tears streaming down her perfect face. How could you abandon everything for a mortal man? How could love matter more than duty? Martha smiled, the expression transforming her spectral features with joy that transcended death itself. Because duty without love is just fear wearing a prettier face. I didn't abandon our people, Celestine. I found a better way to serve them. Love multiplies rather than divides. When we split the stone through willing sacrifice made in perfect love, both fragments will be stronger than the original. The lead Celestial stepped forward, his ancient features showing wonder. Is such a thing possible? With love, all things are possible, Martha replied. But it requires perfect trust, absolute willingness to sacrifice for the beloved, and the understanding that some gifts can only be given once. She turned back to Silas, and in her eyes he saw the same love that had sustained him through 20 years of grief, the same warmth that had made his simple cabin feel like paradise. Are you ready, my darling? She asked. Are you prepared to become something greater than either of us could be alone? Silas looked around the clearing, at the desperate Celestials, at Celestine's hopeful face, at Whiskey and the ravens who had been Martha's faithful guardians. Then he looked back at the woman who had given up immortality to love him, who was now offering to sacrifice her peace in death to save both their worlds. I'm ready, he said, raising the luminous stone above his head. Let's show them what love can do. The moment Silas raised the luminous stone, the world transformed around them. The clearing filled with light that was more than illumination. It was pure creation given form, the fundamental force that had birthed stars and shaped galaxies. The assembled Celestials stepped back in awe, their perfect features reflecting wonder that transcended their centuries of existence. Martha's spirit grew more solid, her translucent form gaining substance as the stone's power flowed through her. She reached out to touch Silas's face, and he felt the warmth of her love as clearly as he had on their wedding day. The division requires perfect unity, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated with cosmic forces. Our souls must become one again, just as they were in life, but stronger. Are you willing to trust me completely? Always, Silas replied without hesitation. Martha smiled and placed her hands over his on the stone. The artifact's light intensified, and suddenly Silas could feel her presence inside his mind, not as an intrusion, but as a completion. Every memory they had shared, every moment of joy and sorrow, every quiet evening by the fire, all of it flowed between them in perfect understanding. Through Martha's memories, he experienced her life as Seraphina, felt the weight of cosmic responsibility she had carried for centuries. He understood now why she had run, why the simple promise of mortal love had seemed like salvation itself. The burden of guardianship wasn't just power, it was the endless awareness of suffering across countless worlds. The knowledge that every choice affected millions of lives. But he also felt something else through their connection. Martha's growing understanding of what love truly meant. In becoming human, in choosing mortality, she hadn't abandoned her duties. She had discovered that love was the ultimate guardian force, the power that chose to protect rather than control. "Now you see," she whispered, their minds so intertwined that speech was unnecessary. "The stone doesn't need a guardian who rules through duty. It needs one who serves through love." The Celestials watched in fascination as the couple began to move in perfect synchrony, their hands tracing patterns in the air that left trails of starlight. The ritual Martha was teaching him came not from ancient texts, but from the heart of creation itself, the fundamental process by which one became many while remaining whole. Celestine stepped closer, her own power adding stability to the working. "Sister, the strain on your spirit, you're burning away what little remains of your essence." "I know," Martha replied, her form beginning to flicker like candlelight in wind. "But love isn't diminished by giving. It's multiplied." The stone in their joined hands began to resonate, its internal light pulsing faster as cosmic forces gathered around them. Silas felt the artifact's consciousness more clearly than ever before, ancient, wise, and filled with compassion for the beings it had guided across eons. The stone wanted this division to succeed, wanted to become something greater than it had been. Through the stone's memories, Silas saw the truth of its existence. It wasn't just an artifact created by some long-dead civilization. It was a living embodiment of love itself, love so pure and powerful that it had taken physical form to guide and protect younger races as they learned to navigate the cosmos. Every guardian the stone had chosen throughout history had been selected for their capacity to love, not their ability to wield power. Martha had been worthy not because of her magical abilities, but because of her willingness to sacrifice everything for the sake of connection. And now, as the division ritual reached its crucial moment, Silas understood what the stone was truly offering him. Not just the role of guardian, but the chance to become love incarnate, a force of protection and nurturing that could span worlds and touch countless lives. The light around them intensified until the clearing was brighter than noon, but it was a gentle radiance that warmed rather than burned. The Celestials had to shield their eyes, but Silas and Martha remained clearly visible at the center of the maelstrom, their love for each other creating a calm space within the cosmic storm. "It's time," Martha said, her voice echoing with harmonics that spoke to the fundamental forces of creation. "Feel the stone's essence, understand its nature, and help me divide it, not through breaking, but through multiplication." Silas closed his eyes and let his consciousness merge completely with the artifact's living light. What he found there took his breath away. Not an object, but a being of such profound love that it chose to appear as stone to avoid overwhelming the creatures it guided. The luminous stone was love given form, compassion made manifest, the very essence of connection between souls. Understanding flooded through him as the stone revealed its deepest secret. Division wasn't destruction, it was reproduction. Like a living creature creating offspring, the stone could spawn a duplicate of itself, if the conditions were right. But those conditions required a love so complete, so selfless, that it could serve as the template for cosmic creation. Martha's spirit began to fade as she poured her essence into the working, her sacrifice powering the impossible transformation. But even as she grew translucent, her love burned brighter, filling the clearing with warmth that reached into every heart present. The moment of division arrived, like the birth of a star, sudden, brilliant, and transformative beyond measure. In Silas's hands, the luminous stone began to pulse with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat, then Martha's, then some cosmic tempo that encompassed both their loves and transcended them. Martha's spirit flared with final brilliance as she gave everything she had left to the working. "Remember," she whispered, her voice already fading, "love shared is love multiplied. What we create today will be stronger than what came before." The stone split, not with the violence of breaking, but with the gentle parting of flower petals opening to the sun. Where one artifact had been, two now rested in Silas's palms, each glowing with its own perfect radiance. They were identical yet unique, like twins born of the same cosmic womb. The transformation sent shockwaves through both realms. In the celestial world, the dying crystal spires suddenly blazed with renewed life as power flowed back into their foundations. Here in the mountain clearing, the very air shimmered with benevolent energy that made the pine trees glow and filled the sky with aurora-like streams of color. But the effort had cost Martha everything. Her spirit form dissolved into motes of light that danced around Silas for a moment before being absorbed into the twin stones. She was gone, not dead, for she had already been dead, but transformed. Her essence now part of the cosmic artifacts themselves. Silas felt her presence in both stones, her love now literally infusing their power. When he held them, he could hear her laughter in their crystalline song, feel her warmth in their gentle glow. She hadn't died again, she had become something eternal, a part of the universe's fundamental forces. Celestine approached with tears streaming down her face, her hand extended toward one of the stones. "May I?" Silas placed one of the artifacts in her palm, and immediately her face lit up with wonder. "She's here," she breathed. "Seraphina is in the stone itself now. I can feel her, hear her voice." The lead celestial stepped forward, his ancient features transformed by hope. "The realm, I can sense the change. Our world is stabilizing, growing strong again. The slow death has been halted." Around the clearing, the other celestials began to weep, tears of joy, of relief, of gratitude so profound it bordered on worship. Their long exile was ending. Their people would survive. The cosmic balance would be maintained, but Silas held on to the second stone, feeling its power thrumming through his bones. The artifact that remained with him was no longer just the luminous stone. It was something new, something that had never existed before. A fusion of cosmic force and human love, of immortal power and mortal understanding. Through its crystalline structure, he could sense both stones' purpose. The one Celestine held would return to the crystal chamber, taking its place as the heart of the celestial realm. It would restore their world, heal their people, and ensure their civilization's survival for eons to come. The stone he held would remain on Earth, but it wouldn't be hidden away in a mountain cabin. Its purpose was different, to serve as a guardian for worlds that had no cosmic protectors, to watch over the small and forgotten corners of creation where love struggled against darkness. Martha's voice whispered through the stone's song, "This was always meant to be, my darling. Not just you and me, but something greater, love given form and purpose, protection born of sacrifice willingly made." Silas looked around the clearing, seeing it with new eyes. The cabin, where they had shared 18 years of mortal happiness. The river where whiskey had found the shell. The mountains that had sheltered their simple life. All of it was transformed by the stone's presence into something sacred. But he could also see beyond this place. Sense other worlds where the stone's twin would be needed. Distant planets where young civilizations struggled with forces beyond their understanding. Lost realms where hope was fading and love seemed powerless against cosmic indifference. "What happens now?" Celestine asked, cradling her stone like a precious child. "Now we go home," the lead celestial replied, but he was looking at Silas with something approaching reverence. And you, guardian of the new stone, will you accept the responsibility that comes with such power? Silas felt the weight of the question, the magnitude of what was being offered. He could return to his simple mountain life, using the stone's power only to maintain his solitude. Or he could embrace the greater purpose that Martha's sacrifice had made possible. The answer came without hesitation, born from 20 years of quiet contemplation and the wisdom that love had taught him. "I accept," he said, feeling Martha's joy resonate through the stone. "But I won't abandon this place. Love needs roots, and this mountain, this simple cabin, this will be my base. From here, I'll watch over the worlds that need watching, protect the loves that need protecting." The transformation was complete. 2 stones where one had been, 2 guardians where none had sufficed, and love multiplied into cosmic force that would endure long after the current crisis was forgotten. 3 months later, Silas stood on his familiar porch with his morning coffee, watching the sunrise paint the Bitterroot Peaks in shades of gold and rose. The scene was unchanged from countless mornings before, yet everything was different now. The coffee cup still bore Martha's painted wildflowers, but now each bloom seemed to pulse gently with inner light, a reflection of the stone's presence in his life. Whiskey lay at his feet, grayer around the muzzle, but somehow more vital than he'd been in years. The dog's brush with cosmic forces had left him changed too, his senses sharpened beyond the merely canine. He could detect threats across dimensional boundaries now. Though mostly, he used his enhanced abilities to find the best spots for afternoon naps in the increasingly magical forest around their home. Temperance perched on the porch railing, no longer needing to maintain her lonely vigil. The 6 ravens who had joined her during the crisis had returned to whatever mysterious purposes ravens served. But she remained, not as Martha's messenger anymore, but as a friend who shared the secret of what this place had become. The clearing around the cabin hummed with benevolent energy that made flowers bloom out of season and drew wildlife from miles around. Deer grazed fearlessly in the meadow, knowing they were under the protection of forces that transcended the natural order. Bears brought their cubs to drink from the stream, sensing the sanctuary that love had created. Silas carried the new stone, as he'd come to think of it, in a leather pouch Martha had made years ago for collecting interesting rocks. The artifact seemed to appreciate the irony, pulsing with what he'd learned to recognize as cosmic amusement. Through their growing bond, he discovered that the stones possessed not just consciousness, but personalities, shaped by the love that had created them. The stone that remained with him had inherited Martha's curiosity about small wonders, her delight in unexpected beauty, her gentle sense of humor. When he used its power to help distant worlds, guiding lost explorers away from cosmic hazards, strengthening the resolve of beings fighting impossible odds, he felt her presence in every act of protection. The connection worked both ways. Through the twin link that bound the divided stones, he could sense the restored vitality of the celestial realm. Crystal spires that had been dim for decades now blazed with renewed life. The floating islands that housed their cities had stabilized, no longer drifting toward dissolution. Most importantly, celestial children were being born again, the first new life their realm had seen in over a century. Celestine visited monthly, stepping through dimensional barriers as easily as walking through a doorway. The reunion of the stones had given her abilities she'd never possessed before, allowing her to serve as an ambassador between realms. She brought news of her world's recovery and gratitude from a people who had learned to hope again. "My sister chose well," she'd said during her last visit, watching Silas tend the garden that now produced vegetables of impossible perfection. You understand what she understood, that true power serves life, not dominion. The responsibilities of guardianship were lighter than Silas had expected, perhaps because they flowed from love rather than duty. When distant worlds called for help, he didn't feel burdened by obligation, but drawn by the same impulse that had once made him share his breakfast with a stray raven. The stone amplified his natural compassion. making it possible to touch lives across the cosmos with gestures as simple as a warm thought or a moment of genuine care. He'd helped a young civilization avoid a war that would have destroyed them, not through mighty interventions, but by inspiring their leaders to remember what they truly fought to protect. He'd guided a lost generation of explorers back to their home galaxy by showing them the constellation that marked their people's origin. He'd even saved a romance between beings of different species by helping them understand that love transcended the boundaries there. Societies had created each act of guardianship, strengthened his connection to Martha's presence within the stone. She was there in every decision, every moment of compassion, every choice to protect rather than control. Death hadn't ended their marriage. It had transformed it into something cosmic, a partnership that spanned dimensions and touched countless lives. The morning ritual remained unchanged, despite the extraordinary circumstances of his new existence. Coffee on the porch, contemplation of the day ahead, conversation with whiskey about the weather and the behavior of local wildlife. But now these simple moments were infused with awareness of the broader universe. Knowledge that his choices rippled across galaxies, and his love literally sustained worlds. As he finished his coffee and prepared for the day's tasks, checking trap lines that no longer held traps, tending a garden that fed both body and soul, maintaining a cabin that had become a nexus between realms, Silas reflected on the journey that had brought him here. A mountain man's dog had found an impossible shell by a river. Inside that shell, a love that transcended death had reached across 20 years of separation to deliver a message of hope. That message had led to discoveries that challenged everything he thought he knew about life, death, and the nature of reality itself. But in the end, the most important truth had been the simplest one. Love endured. Love multiplied when shared. Love was strong enough to bridge the gap between worlds, between life and death, between duty and desire. Martha's presence stirred within the stone, sharing his contentment with the life they'd built together, first as mortals, now as something greater. The mountains still held onto things thought lost forever, and sometimes what people needed most still found them when they least expected it. The difference was that now, thanks to love given cosmic form, such miracles weren't accidents of fate, but promises kept by those who understood that protecting what mattered was the highest calling any soul could embrace. Silas smiled, set down his empty cup, and began another day of guarding the universe with gentle hands and an open heart.